what is collective trauma and what should we do about it? We're very pleased to be able to introduce Vickie Choitz to let us know. And Vickie, could you begin by just telling us a little bit about your background and also your organization, the Corporation for a Skilled Workforce?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sagar, for the warm welcome. I really appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I do have a few slides that will help us um, learn a little bit more about CSW, Corporation for a Skilled Workforce, and our team. Okay, so I want to make sure, are you all seeing the PowerPoint presentation?
It's not in the slide view yet.
Okay, I'm not sure.
Some,
Tech
so did you
issues.
launch? Did you launch it?
I did. I'm trying to launch the PowerPoint. We'll see if that works. If not, I will just share one moment. Here we go. Let's get this into slideshow. How's that?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Um, hello everyone. I hope that you're doing well. I know I had to take a few deep breaths because we've gotten so much great information today. Corporation for a Skilled Workforce, where I work, is a national nonprofit organization that works with workforce development organizations, post-secondary education institutions, and employers to improve economic mobility, equity, and workplace opportunities and cultures. We are technically based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We've been around for over 30 years. However, we are a completely virtual organization. So I am generally based in Somerville, Massachusetts, which is right outside of Boston. But today I am zooming in from San Francisco, California, where I am cat sitting for our cousins for 5 weeks. So I have a lot of workplace flexibility. So we are taking advantage of it by seeing various parts of the world. We do have 5 teams at CSW. You can see them listed on the screen. And I lead the Trauma and Resilience at Work team. Now, this team got started a couple of years ago during COVID when we started to realize how much collective trauma COVID was having, the pandemic was having for people in all kinds of workplaces, the financial insecurity, the unemployment, the evictions that we were seeing, especially for folks from low-income communities that we generally work with. And so I have lived experience with childhood trauma, and I knew what that trauma would do to people's brains and how it would affect their ability to succeed at work, succeed in a job training program, succeed in life. So I was working with CSW, and we said, why don't we see if there's any programs out there that help workforce development professionals in particular understand the trauma that individuals coming to them for job training or employment might be experiencing. And there were no programs nationally that were specifically focused for folks at career centers or at nonprofit organizations that provide employment. And those were the people that we knew very well. So we created a program, and that's how the CSW Trauma and Resilience team was born. And we do training initiatives, we do organizational coaching. We like to do strategy development, helping state governments and local governments really understand what the resources are, some of which you've heard of today, and just really doing research and field building to help folks understand the programs and resources and tools that are out there. So before we get started, I like to have a little more interactivity. So I tried to build in a little bit today in our presentation. And because Sagar kind of established the cat theme with the keynote speaker, and I'm cat sitting in San Francisco, we thought we would do a very official poll using the cat scale to see how you're feeling today. So if you would like to put in the chat which one of these kitty cats you are identifying with right now, it's a fun way for us to just have a little break and kind of see where we're at.
And I'm monitoring the numbers, Vickie. I'm seeing a lot of ones and sevens.
Oh, okay. Okay. So studious there, kind of reflecting, taking it all in. Oh, and seven. Okay, sevens. Get up out of your chair and watch this presentation standing up, maybe rocking a little bit, maybe doing a little dancing. That'll kind of wake you up a little bit, get your body and brain moving a
You're
little.
starting to get more sixes, so I think your talk is working.
Yay! All right. And I apologize for anybody who's afraid of or allergic to cats. These guys are just on the screen, so they can't hurt you. So I threw that in real quick when I heard the cat theme. This was the icebreaker I was planning to do. So you got a couple of examples here. What are you grateful for in this moment? And this is a resilience building skill, really documenting and acknowledging what's working well in our lives, what we are grateful for. That helps the brain switch to a more positive, productive place. And it's a really good hack when you might be feeling down, when you might be feeling burnt out. And it's something you can do personally. It's something that you can do as a team and your organization. So I invite you to type in the chat. What are you feeling grateful for in this moment? And Sagar, if you wouldn't mind reading out a
Yeah,
few, that would be
well,
great.
I'm seeing a wide variety. I think there was a defensive reaction from all the dog owners. You know, they think that the cats have monopolized this conference far too much. So there were a lot of people, celebrating their dogs. Um,
Yay.
a lot of people, of course, have said family. The first few were really praising the virtues of snacks and coffee. And then the tea drinkers got into the act and started saying tea and tea. So now we're getting the more philosophical types, people talking about advocacy for mental health and someone liking to work remotely. Several people actually saying they're really grateful for remote work, as no doubt you are, Vickie.
Absolutely. I definitely am. Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for your teamwork on that, Zagar. That's another great example of a principle we'll be talking about in just a moment. So our session objectives today are to define collective trauma, just so that way you understand what that is, describe how collective trauma might show up in the workplace, and share a framework for cultivating a trauma-informed workplace. And I'll give you a little spoiler alert. The framework that we share is very similar to the frameworks you've seen in previous presentations. So I invite you to look at the different frameworks that have been shared in this conference. Pick the one that resonates with you and your organization and go for it. One is not better than the other. They're all very similar, but different ones will resonate with different organizations. And so you have the choice to choose that and go with it. Before we get too far into the presentation, I do want to encourage you to listen to your body and prep for self-care. If, as we're talking about collective trauma, or as I'm talking about the definition of trauma, your heart starts to palpitate, you start to get a little sweaty, you start to get a little anxious, that's your body telling you, hey, this is making me uncomfortable. You feel free to get up and stretch a little bit to try to calm the body down. You can do some deep breaths in and out and have the out breath be longer than the in breath because that will calm your nervous system. If it's too much, walk away from the presentation and come back later. This is being recorded, so you can always watch it later. Also on the poster are great other examples of ways to take a break. It's so important to give your brain a break. We would not run marathon after marathon after marathon or do that to our bodies, but we do that to our brains all the time, every day. So we need to learn to build in those 5 and 10-minute breaks that I have been so grateful for today that we've had during this conference. So build that into your work and into your team's work. That's one example of self-care and collective care. So what is collective trauma? The definition that we use is it's an event that occurs when a society, a culture, community, or a group is impacted by one traumatic event or the same series of traumatic events. And we take that from this citation here. I wanted to share some examples, but before I do, you all are very smart people. What are some examples of collective trauma that you've noticed in the last few years? And Sagar, if I could get your help again, because I don't know, my chat screen has disappeared, so I'm not going to try to
Well,
pull it up.
a lot of it is about COVID, of course,
Yeah.
mass shootings. some about firings in the workplace,
Mhm.
a fair number about political events, elections and,
Yep.
the national malaise, of course, the war in Europe.
Yep. You have named them. These are examples. And again, listen to your body. If being reminded of these collective traumas is upsetting, breathe or take a break or get up and move around a little bit to kind of work out that trauma triggering. Yeah, those are exactly the ones that I came up with as well. Also, natural disasters with the fires out here in California, the hurricanes, the droughts, the flooding, and growing economic. Oh, that's supposed to be growing economic inequality. Sorry about that typo. Also, racial injustice and the police brutality that we have seen more and more of in the last few years. So that's what we're talking about, and that's what's impacting ourselves and our employees and our friends and family as well. So we also should define trauma because I think that folks might use this term a little more broadly than the actual definition would suggest. So this is from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, kind of the premier organization for understanding mental health and trauma. It's an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual. And we underlined experience by because different people will have different responses to traumas. Two people may be in the exact same car wreck, but have completely different responses because of their different biological makeups, because of their different lived experience. If one has had a lot of trauma in their lives, that they may be more sensitive to that trauma and it may affect them to greater intensity neurologically, whereas another person may not have had as much trauma in their lives, or they may have more resilience factors, which help their neurological system to be more resilient to that type of trauma. So keep in mind that, including collective trauma, different events will affect individuals differently. Um, and it's experienced by the individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life threatening. So, the difference between trauma and stress, or even toxic stress, is that the individual's brain and body interpret that event as life threatening. So, they may have a response that feels like over the top to somebody, but their bodies and brains are reacting to save their lives because they are experiencing it as life threatening. So, that's really important to keep in mind. And the event has lasting effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So there's two parts to that. It has lasting effects. So, a lot of people think, oh, COVID's done. The emergency ended on, May 11th, a couple of years ago. We should be over with this. Well, if somebody experienced COVID-19 as a traumatic event, it has a long tail and it can stay with them. That trauma, that sensitivity to threats is still there in their neurological system and in their body. And it can also affect individuals in different ways. We can have mental effects, we can have physical effects. It affects our social relationships at work and at home. It affects us emotionally and spiritually, possibly. So keep that in mind as we're talking about not only collective trauma, which we're talking about today, but also other types of trauma, PTSD, adverse childhood experiences. This is what defines what the trauma is. So I love Sean Egan's reference to the brain on toxic stress and trauma because it's really a brain function. So if you've experienced or you've seen the experience of these factors, anger, anxiety, body aches, brain fog, confusion, depression, these could be normal, automatic bodily responses to abnormal experiences. That's what the brain is experiencing when we experience toxic stress or trauma. And we've named some of these adverse experiences. Some are collective trauma, some are personal traumas, some are racial trauma. And what's happening is our brains are going into survival mode, and the amygdala is kicking in And it's literally cutting off the thinking of the frontal cortex and the thinking part of our brain, the kind of rationalizing, the analytical part, because it's like, if we're being chased by a threat, we don't have time to analyze it. We don't have time to weigh pros and cons. We got to get out of here, guys. And so the amygdala just kicks in before you can even think about what reaction your body and your brain is having to that trauma or a trauma triggering. So, for example, I talked about survival of childhood trauma, which included abuse. Well, I worked for a bullying boss a few years ago, and that bullying boss triggered the memories of an abusive father in my brain. And it all happened in the amygdala. I had no idea what was going on in the frontal cortex because the amygdala was kicking in first. So had to, went to therapy, got all this brain science, figured it out, and now I know what's happening. But I also know that that brain response is a normal response to abnormal experiences. So if somebody or you are having one of these types of responses, you're not the broken one. What's broken are these abnormal experiences. So I just want to make sure that you know that, and you can share that with others that you work with to make sure that they also understand that these are normal responses to abnormal experiences. So, how does collective trauma show up in the workplace? Well, it's the typical fight, flight, freeze, or submit responses. And some people like to use the fawn for submit. Uh, we or our colleagues may be lashing out, angry outbursts, there may be tension because we're fighting off a threat. That's what our brain is doing. We may be in flight mode, disconnection between colleagues, avoidance of people and emotions. When I had my bullying boss, I avoided that person at all costs. I was like, what is wrong with me? This is horrible. Because I didn't realize my brain was trying to flee from that threat. Freezing, anxiety, difficult with planning or goal setting, and then submitting or fawning, which is, we see this sometimes with easily giving up attitude or just not being engaged, low employee engagement. So these are kind of some of the examples of the behavioral responses that might show up. I'm going to skip this one. So I loved the opening speaker's backpack analogy of this weight that we carry around, and who knew you could have cartoons around trauma? But we love to use this cartoon because it really demonstrates, what some of us who are trauma survivors or who are experiencing collective trauma and trying to work through that are experiencing. So somebody may have past trauma that they're carrying around, and then you add bad news, the political polarization, the pandemic, the stress from firings, and then there's just a minor inconvenience. But because you're carrying around that heavy load, that minor inconvenience becomes a bigger deal. So this is for those visual folks, kind of explains a little bit about how trauma can be compounding and how we can have these responses that may feel a little over the top, but it's because we're having so much trauma that we're carrying around. So the other thing that I really want to make sure that you understand, and it's been alluded to by previous speakers, is the physical responses that we experience when we are faced with trauma, collective trauma, and even toxic stress. And this is really important because toxic stress and trauma are literally killing us slowly. And we have an obligation to counter that for ourselves, for our colleagues, and for our folks in our organizations. So whether you're being chased by a bear or feeling major toxic environment and toxic stress at work or at home, your body sends off an alarm system, an emergency alarm system. And the amygdala does this again. And so cortisol and adrenaline, stress hormones, start flowing through your body. It helps you to run fast, to fight hard, but it's also not designed to do that. Your body is not designed to have all these stress hormones going through it like this. And so it actually wears down our physical systems. So we have weakened immune systems, we have more heart disease, we have higher blood pressure, diabetes, more autoimmune conditions, we're exhausted, we're fatigued. And so if this stress, if we're in this constant state of stress, people can lose 20 years of their life just due to the stress hormones constantly wearing our bodies down. So we really have an obligation to counter stress, toxic stress, and trauma in order to make sure that we're not harming people physically as well as mentally. So how does the trauma's physical response show up at work? I already talked a little bit about it, but employees may struggle to perform physical tasks because they've got back pain, because they are exhausted, they're fatigued. This can be especially dangerous in the trades when people do need to lift heavy things or move equipment or be sharp when they're operating a crane so they don't hurt somebody. We may see increased sick day usage or medical leave because people are physically worn down. They are physically injured due to all of that stress from the trauma. And we may see higher insurance usage and costs. So that's the challenge, and I know that that can be heavy and hard, but I think it's really important for us to understand what's happening, so that way we can adopt behaviors and practices and workplace policies and cultures to really counter all of that. So how do we cultivate a trauma-informed workplace? Again, this has been alluded to, but I want to make sure it's extremely clear to everyone in this session that this requires not only individual mental health supports and self-care, but it also there's obligations and opportunities for our teams and our organizations to support that. This cannot fall on just the shoulders of the individual. So with mentally healthy teams, we need collective care. Scott, the first speaker, also called it mutual care and shared care. It has to be done. Because a person can adopt as many self-care techniques as they want, but if they're working in an organization that doesn't provide that collective care, they're not going to survive. And also normalizing that self-care and collective care. Some of the examples earlier were, making sure that you as a manager take all your vacation time, so that way you model that for your employees. And then a mentally healthy organizational culture, supporting self-care and collective care. And the 6 key principles are the framework I'm going to share today. But again, there was the U.S. Surgeon General's framework. And Scott, the first speaker, had some great principles that are in his book. So again, pick the one that resonates best with you and your organization. So we at CSW use the SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's 6 key principles for a trauma-informed approach to talk about the principles that are important and need to be put in place and followed and adopted at an organization in order to have a mentally healthy, trauma-informed workplace. And those 6 key principles are safety, which you've seen. That's also one in the Surgeon General's report. And we talked about, there's a great conversation about psychological safety in an earlier presentation. Trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural humility and responsiveness. And I highlighted a few of these because they're especially important when we're talking about collective trauma. Because collective trauma requires collective support and healing. And these are the 3 principles that really double down on the collective support and healing. We're going to go through each one of these. Before we do that, though, I want to have you keep in mind 2 types of strategies. There's the technical, so the policies, the procedures that we adopt in our team and in our organization, and then there's the cultural. How do we treat each other as human beings? So keep an eye out for examples of each one of those. And I would encourage you, as I'm going through the examples, to ask yourself 2 questions and maybe jot down some notes. One is, what is my organization doing now to implement this principle? And the second question is, what could my organization be doing more or differently to implement this principle? And so you can start to get some ideas through this workshop of what you might explore with your team and your organization after this conference. So there's been some amazing examples of a lot of these principles in the session or in the conference so far. Safety is really about physical safety, but also psychological safety, ensuring that the building feels physically safe and secure to people. Is there enough lighting in the parking lot? Are you in a safe neighborhood? And if not, are there safety procedures in place that if there is a threat to the organization or a threat to the employees, that people know what to do? Do staff feel safe talking with their managers about difficult personal situations? And we talked about that a little bit. No workplace bullying. That's kind of a no-brainer, but there's a lot of workplace bullying that happens than I think people acknowledge and realize. Trust and transparency, making sure that you start with session objectives or team meeting agendas. So that way everything is transparent. It also helps with safety, psychological safety. If people know where they're going in a meeting, then their brain doesn't have to worry about where they're going. And so that helps to keep our brains calm and our ability to engage our thinking brains in the meeting. Sharing important information in multiple times in various formats, that's already been covered. And we've already talked about leadership being transparent about their own self-care and collective care needs and modeling it. Peer support, and these ideas are all kind of mutual, or these principles are all kind of mutually reinforcing. So if it feels like they're overlapping, they are, and that's designed to be that way. Peer support, one idea that we use on our team is at the beginning of our weekly check-ins, we have a self-care check-in. And we know what each other's self-care is, and we're checking in to make sure that we're all following our self-care to take care of ourselves, but also so that way we can be better colleagues on the team. Because if we start to slack on our self-care, we're not bringing our full productive selves to work, and so we're not able to really fully engage in the work that needs to be done. I'm going to go through some of these a little quicker because I want to make sure we have time for questions, and a lot of the examples have been covered. Collaboration and mutuality, do things more as a team. I really see the icebreakers as a opportunity to engage in mutuality because we're all peers, we're all equals, and sharing with each other and making those connections with each other. Um, Empowerment, voice, and choice. This is one I really try to follow and I find very powerful, is to invite people more often rather than requiring them to do things. And give people choices. Do you want to do this or that? Do you want to write the memo in the morning or in the afternoon? What works best for you, etc. And cultural humility and responsiveness. Clearly ensure that information is provided in multiple languages if needed, acknowledge and celebrate racial and cultural differences, also the spiritual differences that came up in the last breakout session. That is part of this, and provide that flexibility that we've seen so many examples of already today in the conference. Just wanted to provide you with a few additional tools. At CSW, we've written a trauma and resilience set of quick guides, which are like 4 to 5 page infographic little chapters that talk about the brain science of trauma and resilience. So what I talked about today, talk about how trauma in this case shows up in workforce development, but you could interpret that to be in the workforce. There's a third chapter on using a specific tool called Lapis, which is how do you respond to trauma triggering in real time? And a lot of that overlaps with the presentation in the previous breakout from the APA Foundation and their framework, which is cool to see the mutual reinforcement of those tools. And then the final chapter is on cultivating a culture of resiliency, and it goes through the SAMHSA 6 key principles and provides some examples. Just wanted to show you the Lapis model, which is really all about listening first before trying to offer advice or suggest to people what they should do. And the reason we do this is because trauma is all about the body and brain not feeling safe. In order to get folks to a place where we can have a productive conversation, we have to get their bodies and brains to a place where they feel safe. The way that's going to happen is to have them talk through what is concerning them and kind of metabolizing that and processing it, and also making sure they feel physically safe, et cetera. But your job as a trauma-informed, responsive person is to do what the person needs. And at that time, their brain needs to feel safe, needs to calm down. And that's why listening and affirming people's experience are the first things to do before diving into solution. Here's another really cool tool from Olga Phoenix, a self-care model that shows the different dimensions of self-care, has a lot of different examples. And Olga has a blank worksheet on her website where individuals can fill in their own self-care strategies on this wheel that you can plug in. And you want to have a diversity of self-care strategies. So that way, if you can't use one of your self-care tools on a particular day, like if you like to go for long walks, but it's raining out and you can't utilize that self-care strategy, you've got some other things to fill in when you need to, like petting your cat for 10 minutes, which is a very calming thing for me. Just wanted to share some additional reading. You will get the PowerPoint presentation and all of these links work and go to different short articles and websites and books on collective trauma specifically. And I now invite you to take a few deep breaths. I'm going to take a few deep breaths as we start to go into questions. And I will put this link into the chat. So that way it's a favorite song of mine that I like to just kind of breathe and relax to before I go to the next thing. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody.
All right. Well, thank you, Vickie. I do encourage owners of pets other than cats to enumerate the benefits of other types of pet ownership.
Yes, absolutely. We're all about diversity.
I'm going to just take I'm going to copy one of the things you did, and I'm going to ask for something interactive from the audience while we're waiting for additional
Yeah.
questions to come in. And that is, you ask them to type in, some collective trauma. So I want you to just type in some collective joy. Is there something that happened that was, fun, not just for you, but you thought like for the country or for your community or for your team or something? Just type in something that was fun, good, made you happy or something like that. And I'd like to be able to say something. Actually, I will, just in the interest of my own safety, I'm going to veer away from politics, but I am seeing a lot of Olympics mentioned. That's Simone Biles, of course,
Yeah.
the NFL draft in Detroit. Yeah, as someone who appreciates the resurgence of Detroit, I'll definitely give that one a big plug. Student loan forgiveness. Oh man, yeah, so many students need that. Summer, all right. Someone was finally able to eat breakfast with their daughter today. Okay,
Oh,
kayaking. Yeah, this is definitely weather for kayaking. All right. Okay, we got at least one dog reference in here. Good. You know,
yay.
I unfortunately I have two cats, but I grew up with dogs, but because of allergies, no dogs allowed. So, but
I
it's
also do dog sitting. So we have little Sunshine who we dog sit in Minnesota. So I can be a dog person too.
all right. So we can, now that we've reset the temperature here towards some happier things. We will take we will get some questions. So one question is, what if there has been a collective trauma in the workplace, or that has affected the workplace, and there's low morale in the organization? Do you have any thoughts on how what kind of response the organization can have, or even individuals? What can they do to contribute to turning that low morale around?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, we don't ignore the collective trauma or trauma because it doesn't go away. The body keeps the score. Bessel van der Kolk's book, and it's so true. So, we want to offer opportunities for healing to acknowledge that the trauma happened, particularly if it's, like racial trauma, police shootings or mass shootings that affect a particular group. A major way of helping with healing and building resilience to that is to have discussion groups, to have affinity groups, to bring in, a facilitator to do a grief circle, to have a town hall meeting in which there's genuine, safe,
I'm
psychologically
going.
safe sharing.
I'm going to just interrupt that with a
Okay.
huge caveat, and that is
Uh-huh.
if people want it. Okay,
Yeah,
because
absolutely. It's all
actually,
voluntary.
psychiatric research has shown that sending in grief workers or something and forcing people, to talk. I mean, everyone has their own way of coping. And
Right.
so if there were a shooting in the workplace, the last thing, it's actually research has shown that this creates people being worse off. If you forced a group of employees who had witnessed some trauma in the workplace to then break up into small groups and they, quote, talk about the incident, that backfires. So it's being able to offer resources but also respecting that different people may want to handle it differently, and some people may not want to talk about it at all, and so not forcing people to do the collective grief or anything like that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for putting that big caveat in there. And that goes back to the principle of choice and voice and empowerment. Always, always offer choice. And so, bringing that in as a voluntary optional resource for folks, giving people time off if that's what they need, allowing sick days to be used for mental health days. Um, when the time is right and when it's appropriate, having gratitude as a team meetings, just like we did with the slide on the icebreaker. What are you grateful for in this moment, in order to have a counter to that big heavy negativity? Some people work out their grief and their trauma through physical activities, because that builds up, the tension builds up in the body, and so, offering, walking groups, gym memberships, rage rooms. I gave my teammate a gift certificate to a smash room when her mother died, because she had a lot of trauma from that, and she just had to get out that rage, and so she was able to smash computers and printers and all kinds of stuff, and it helped her process that. It wasn't the only thing that she did, but that was one example. So definitely, read your team, find out what will work for them, offer choices so that way different people can process the collective trauma that occurred, and realize that it'll take time and it may take multiple activities in order for people to process through that collective trauma. And I say having a supportive workplace culture in the first place will help to reduce the intense reactions too.
So just to add on to that, some
Hmm.
employers are now making it okay explicitly to take a mental health day so that it's
Hmm.
not like you have to pretend you have a cold or you pretend you have COVID. But it's understood that this may be used for physical or mental health as appropriate. So some employers are actually fully acknowledging that, and then people can take advantage of that. A second point I did want to mention is that a number of employers do support digital tools, including certain apps. And while the medical evidence on apps is a little bit mixed, in general, some of the apps that are for that include elements of meditation or relaxation, and the two most popular ones, I'm not paid by either one or anything, but there's Calm and Headspace. Those are the two leading apps, and I actually have Headspace on my own phone. And there has been a fair bit of research with those two apps that they can promote relaxation. They're not treatments for mental disorders, but they are helpful for, feeling lousy, feeling stressed, and things like that. And so that is something that people can choose to get, and they can use it privately. And what's nice about that is you can use it whenever you're awake, right? You can decide you can't like always phone a therapist or go for a walk or something in the middle of the night, but you could use an app.
Absolutely. I put in the chat, I use Insight Timer, and they've got everything from like a 2 minute meditation, if you just need to give that brain a break. I see it as like a little brain massage, is the way I see meditation, or a 45-minute one. I did a 45-minute one just the other day, lying on the couch, which is right over here. The cool thing about meditation too is that you can do it as a group. So I was at a director's retreat last week with my colleagues, and we did a group meditation before the second day session, just to kind of get everybody's brain calmed down and to a point where we can take in the information and do the work that we needed to do for that retreat. So normalizing the use of brain hacks and
So
yeah, yoga
there are a
too.
number of other comments. Yeah, you mentioned it about yoga. There is one complicated question, and we only have a couple of minutes. So
Okay.
I know we can only very lightly answer, but suppose you're in a big organization that has a lot of problems and all that. There's there, as the person in the question says, there's a lot of upper management issues of inconsistency, dishonesty, bullying, and then there are people being laid off, and then other people taking advantage of early retirement and getting out and all that sort of stuff. If you have a very sort of troubled organization because the organizational culture itself is rotting, that's a kind of collective trauma. Any other thoughts
Mhm.
about that?
I would say talk to your colleagues and see if together you can put some pressure on the managers of your team. If you can at least have a safe space in your team that you feel psychologically safe within a broader toxic organization, that can help. The more people you talk to and band together with, you may be able to put more pressure on upper management to recognize that they have a toxic culture. The other thing I would say is that managers and CEOs are people too. And sometimes they're just jerks, but sometimes they may be having their own trauma response to who knows? They may have had adverse childhood experiences. They may be suffering from collective trauma. And so that may be their trauma response. And so it's important for all of us to understand what happens to our brains and our bodies when we have this trauma. So that way, even managers and leaders might be able to recognize, oh my gosh, I'm being a jerk. And it's because I was reminded of this, abusive father or whatever. So to try those things, and this is not going to be a popular
Yeah,
answer at a workplace conference, but sometimes you may just have to leave that organization and go find one that's healthier for you.
right. Yeah, and to that I might just add that there's a old saying, think global but act local. Maybe the group of employees that you work with most closely, you just foster some good coping mechanisms with that. It may not be possible to change the organization, but maybe with your circle of immediate colleagues, you can, do some, go out for dinner, go bowling or something, like actively say, listen, we're in a rotten situation. Maybe we can do something for ourselves. It won't necessarily change the company, but it may make our lives somewhat better.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay,
And know
well,
what you can change and be okay with not being able to change everything.